Dr. Miller with a video on what is the optimal program for you. I'm talking about weight training program here, resistance training program. What's the best one for you? What's the optimal one? What's the golden ticket to muscle growth and strength? And I'm going to be disappointing just up front, so maybe stop watching now. Is there isn't one. There isn't one. And what I want to offer is the clients that I work with, primarily interested in hypertrophy, so gains in muscle size. And I want to offer at least a couple ideas that may be worth trying. Some of you probably have tried, some of you haven't, in taking on this idea of gaining muscle mass. So let's talk about 3 different approaches to gaining muscle mass in terms of programming. I'm talking about just a general program, how you arrange your program, okay? In terms of progression, I'm just going to leave it here. This could be another video. It's all about volume, right? Well, that's not fair. It's primarily about volume. It's not all about volume. There is an intensity component, of course, but building volume is what I should have said in progression. It's ensuring that the progression is focused on volume more than anything else. That's why, at least one of the reasons why, you might see somebody who's very strong, but they're not as big, and the hypertrophy they gained is going to take longer to build over time than would somebody who takes on a more voluminous program. For example, I'm thinking like an Olympic-style weightlifter versus a bodybuilder. That weightlifter will build volume over time, but it's going to take longer because their focus is on intensity more so. So they're going to be restrained by the amount of volume that they can accrue over time because of the higher intensities. Like you can't do 20 reps at 90%, for example, but you can do 20 reps at 75% easily. Okay, and so again, it's about volume accumulation and the size that is gained from. If you know what I'm talking about, you can look at my functional versus non-functional hypertrophy video. I'm not necessarily a fan of those words, but that's a kind of a common terminology. So that was the name of the video. Anyway, so let's talk about 3 different programming types. So number 1, bro split. The typical bro split is upper day, lower day, and who would this be good for or be useful for? So, you might have, in a typical program, you start with a compound movement first. So like an upper body day, you might include a horizontal pressing exercise like the bench press. Your lower body day, you could have one knee dominant, one hip dominant. So one squat dominant day, knee dominant, one hip dominant, more like an RDL / deadlift type of thing. And then all the exercises that follow in that day or a part of that day, upper back, so on and so forth, will be assigned according to body segment. Is this an effective way to program? Yes, it is. It is an effective way to program. And I would say it's an effective way to program for those that are starting out, those that can concentrate their volume and their training volume, like in the upper body, without accruing a ton of fatigue. So if you're doing 3 to 4 or 5 exercises even for the upper body, hitting on the different regions of the body with side laterals and I mentioned the compound movements. So basically, your vertical pressing, vertical pulling, horizontal pushing, horizontal pulling. Some arm work in there. If you want to throw that in leg day, you could. But arm work, biceps, and then your leg day, right? You do some quad dominant stuff, and you could mix in. And I would highly recommend you do. Your quad dominant day, your knee dominant day. You still do some hamstring supportive work, and then on the opposite side, you do, your hip dominant day. You do some quad supportive work, and you could have some compound sets, so on and so forth. But there will come a time that the volume gets so high in those days that by the time you're at the end of the day, the training day, you are so flattened by the training volume. Like let's say you're doing 5 sets per exercise, which is typically the boundary that I put on any one exercise. There's a good study. It's just one study, but also observationally, so anecdotally. 5 sets seems to be a good place to stop for any one exercise, just because fatigue starts to mount and kind of washes out the rest of the sets, what's sometimes called garbage reps, which I don't think there is such a thing. I mean, every rep does something. It just may not be what you want it to. But I think 5 sets is a good cap. So let's say you had 4 to 5 exercises at 20 sets, 25 sets, not including warm up. I mean, that's a lot of work. It's a long time, and if you superset stuff, you're pretty zapped. So, trying to increase upper back volume, if you've already capped out those days, I mean, you do try to do that 3rd exercise for your upper back and you're just smoked. And so it'll be better then at that point to move away from the bro split. Okay, move away from the bro split. And by the way, a bro split could be just a 4-day program. Okay, and that's typically what it is lower, upper, or upper, lower, upper, however you want to arrange it. Usually there's a sequence between one segment and the other. So not a bad idea, especially when you're just starting out. And what I would say is, how do you know when to look for something else? It's when you cap out your training volume within a session, meaning that that, man, if I take on another exercise for my upper back or my chest, it's not gonna go well. It's just gonna be a bunch of fatigue. Okay, that's something I ask clients all the time. Are you getting a pump, which isn't the be all and end all of training, but are you getting more fatigue? And we can kind of visualize this as like, when you're just zapped, right? Versus, hey, I'm getting a good pump here. I'm really getting some good work done. Yeah, I'm tired, but that's not the overriding feeling I'm getting from the training. Okay. Next thing then is start to do a mixed program. And some people really hate the mixed program. They feel like they don't get amount of work done in a session per group that provides benefit. And that could be supported. And so moving back to a bro split for that person could be warranted. But the extension of volume will require more frequency of training. Okay. And so what that is also going to likely require is more days of training. Okay. So if your typical bro split is 4 days, maybe 3, you could do it that way, of course, but you're trying to expose the muscle to more stimulus, right? So this is somebody who is more in the kind of intermediate range, moving away from beginner, more intermediate, okay? And so they have more time, growing more masses of interest. If you get bro split going, and depending on your fiber type and your genetics, you get some really nice results. You're like, I'm good. I'm going to maintenance this thing out, and I'm happy where I'm at. Cool. But if you want to keep growing, you're going to have more volume. And so instead of having upper back worked twice a week with, I'm going to use an extreme example, let's say 20 sets per day, 25 sets per day. Wow. Right. That's a lot. You have nowhere to go. We can do 30 sets, 35 sets. And so the fatigue then is, how many of those sets were really quality anyway? 15, right? And so now you put some of those sets on another day. So you have a third day for the upper back, okay? And so that'll give you some room to grow. So now you have, 5 to 8 sets per day, per 3, okay? Now you have room to grow that back out. And if you grow that set range up, then you have to do the next thing, which I'll talk about. But so essentially you're taking apart the bro split and you're assigning the different movement patterns: vertical push, vertical pull, horizontal pull, knee dominant, hip dominant, biceps, triceps. If you need that extra work, of course, those fall into pressing and pulling days. You spread those out over the course of the week, and you may decide like biceps and tricep specific work maybe only needs 2 days. But the point is that you could work whatever region of the body, whatever those movement patterns is, more than twice a week. And therefore, extending the ability to push volume higher and improving recovery between sessions. Okay, and this can take, you'd be a little strategic about where you place things. Like you don't put all 3 knee dominant days in a row, right? It'd be better to have, if you have one that's a little bit more higher in volume, so you still have an emphasis day. So knee dominant emphasis day, right? And then I'm not going to have another knee dominant emphasis day for at least 2 days if possible. And that one will be moderate in volume. That'll be my mid volume. And then there'll be another one that's maybe even a little bit lower in volume. So I still have you have this high, medium, low approach, or a high, medium, high, whatever it is, but there's rest days built in between the high days, certainly. And if possible, between all days where that particular pattern is the emphasis. And if you do that over the course of a 7-day, you can do that. Now, there's going to be some times it doesn't always work out. Like you might do upper back almost every single day, let's say, or, 4 out of the 5 days, and you're going to have back-to-back days where the upper back is a little smoked, especially coming in, maybe you have a moderate day, then you go to the high volume day, right? But if you go to the high one, then you go to the lower one, or the medium one, volume, talking about volume, then that medium day is going to be rough, right, until you're used to it. So what I'm getting is you can modulate the volume, okay? You could just flatten the volume and say, I'm going to do it every day. I'm going to do 10 sets of upper back every single day. Okay, it's going to take some getting used to, but you can get used to it. Okay, that recovery is actually going to be better, though. Against this idea of concentration of stimulus versus spreading the stimulus out. And I'm big into spreading the stimulus out. I think that's a better way to train. It tends to fend off injuries better, and it produces better quality work. And that goes to the strength and power world, certainly. But even it is extended, in my opinion, and based on some of the research we have, that the more frequency, especially in people who are better trained, the higher the frequency, higher frequency approach is a better approach because it allows the extension of volume. It fends off of the fatigue that's accrued in a workout. And the challenge then is recovery between training sessions for that particular muscle group. That can be done if proper nutrition and the more fitness you gain, your body will be able to adapt to that. So hope that makes sense. So bro split, cool. Build the volume up. Volume's capped. Where to go? More frequency then. Increase the frequency. Well, if you don't want to do that, then you're probably going to enter somewhat of a maintenance phase. You can do some more rest pause type of stuff into your bro split to try to help build the volume out there, and keep the time compressed and keep the quality of movement high. There's things you can do. It's not like, I don't know where to go. That's at least you do have somewhere to go. It's just not as effective. How's that of increasing the frequency? So then what? What's the third one? Well, if you've extended the frequency out as far as you can go, the volume then rebuilds, okay, to the point where there's nowhere left to go, okay? This is where it's going to be really important to modulate the volume and cycles. Now, I should be doing this anyway, but everything I've mentioned already is periodized in the sense that you have a mesocycle of building volume from, I do like the 3-week build and then the 1 deload. That's not the only way to do things. There's some people that can do more, that can extend that. It depends on how much volume you're pushing during a cycle, maybe more or less. But that's of course periodized. But in the way we had build the volume out, there needs to be times where you pull the volume back. And so in this high frequency program, that's great. Build the volume out, and then you might get to the point where you're like, man, I'm pushing a lot of volume, and I'm starting to hit that threshold where fatigue is starting to mount. And I know in the RP world, we talk about maximal recoverable volume and minimum effective volume and all these markers, and this is basically what I'm dancing around those same concepts. But once you push to the point where your body's like, okay, we're not adapting, I have nowhere to go. Well, you still, again, the idea is we're always creating somewhere to go in our training. And so pulling back the volume and doing what could be called a resensitization phase, or essentially letting the body recover and wash out a lot of that fatigue, even though you've been taking deloads along the way, you're probably carrying some fatigue, and going back to a lower volume approach and rebuilding. Okay. Now, how far back you go in that rebuild is up to you. It depends on if you're burnt out or you're a little tired. You could go all the way back to a bro split again and concentrate the stimulus again and rebuild. Now, along the way, you're, of course, rotating exercises, especially those exercises that are isolation, but even adjusting the compound movements in some way is a good idea, even from cycle to cycle is what I like to do. Okay, now there's some compound like a back squat that might keep, but I'll rotate that out occasionally. Okay, and so you might do a cycle where you take the barbell completely out of the program and you run up rep ranges that are higher. So, instead of doing barbell front squats, you do dumbbell front squats and run up to ranges you haven't been working at, let's say 20. Talk about reps per set, and obviously that then is going to have a commensurate drop in amount of sets, and you push the recovery volume. So it's more of a work capacity type of training. Okay, you could go the other way and build strength. So you're going to do a strength cycle, and so what that means, if you looked at your your programming for like a high frequency cycle, right? You could pull back some of the volume in general because you can't do as much volume with higher intensities as the opposite, and so. That'll make your training sessions shorter is what I'm getting at. Okay. And you could even go back to a bro split when you do that, having sets under 5. Okay. And you might do that for a few cycles to build strength. One thing to consider is that if you can build strength, that means there's more tension on the muscle than when you go back to volume. And so, if we think about the concept of time under tension, you can either do one or the other. And so, if you can increase even if you have the same amount of time in a rep, if you increase the amount of tension in the rep because you're stronger, that should produce better adaptation. So that's where to go next, is either extend out the volume per reps per set and get into a rep range you haven't been in just for a cycle or two, probably just one if you go really high. I'm talking about like sets of 20 if you haven't been working up into those sets of 20, even 25. You're like, well, that doesn't seem like again, the body gets stale in its adaptation process. That sounds very not physiological, but it's supported by what we see physiologically. Okay, there needs to be a change in stimulus, or you can go to some heavier stuff. That one will be more stressful on the body, but it has a longer term effect of building strength, which could help in the next volume cycle. Or you could do both. right? You could ramp up to a strength cycle and then drop it down for, push the reps per set up. And so you do your high intensity cycle, then you do your high volume per set cycle, and then back to your general training. Start back down then at half the volume of maybe what you were pushing before. So if you're doing 20 sets on an exercise, start with 10 and rebuild that volume. Okay, so essentially you reset, right, and build back out. Part of that process too, everybody's a little different, is the staleness that can accumulate mentally and psychologically. So having that variety in training is a big deal. I've mentioned this in other videos. The engagement of a lifter or somebody that's a trainee, I guess, is very important. Don't overlook that. It's a lot of the sets and rep schemes that I use, they have physiological underpinnings, but what I'm really after is the psychological engagement with the actual program. If there's no desire to train, there's no drive to train, there's no challenge to train, what kind of, the rep quality goes down, and that's what we're really after. All right, I'm up to 15, 16 minutes. Well, hopefully you're still watching. Probably not, but if you are, good job, you made it. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. More ramblings from me about exercise, sports science, nutrition science. And as always, thank you for watching. If you want to be a Patreon, I'm trying to build the Patreon page out and offer special, certainly Q&As and access to me if you have questions, videos you want me to make. Those are all things that are part of that Patreon page. So if that's something of interest, certainly look up my Patreon page in the description of this video. If not, I'll see you in the next video. And until then, happy training.